So I thought tonight we could talk about embodiment. It's one of those concepts that you may hear in spirituality, and it can be easily misunderstood. Sometimes it's understood to be almost as a energy, even a divine energy that somehow exists outside of what you are, sort of penetrating what you are. But at the end of the day, there's nothing outside. So there's not, it's not sort of a foreign energy, even a divine foreign energy that sort of makes its way into these forms. It's not that at all. It's what it really is. This embodiment is the process, if we could call it that, the process after awakening. The awakening is just recognizing what we actually are and have always been, and which can happen in a moment because it's just a recognition. It's not something that we sort of gradually attain, earn merit for, resolve our karma and be worthy of. None of that. It's just a recognition of what we've always been and already are. So that can happen in a moment, just a moment when we are willing to let go of all the ideas about who we think we are. It can just reveal itself because it's already present. It's already fully functional. So that can be realized in just a flash. Right? And in spirituality, that what could be called enlightenment is talked about as the finish line, like that's the destination beyond which we will live happily ever after. But the truth of it is that it's much more like the starting point than the ending point. I mean, that may not be good news if we've been striving after that realization for a long time, but there's a truth to that because it is, in one sense, a completion of a certain journey, you could say. But it's really the beginning of what could be called a true spiritual journey because it's from that point onward, it is apparent. It may be a little foggy at first. It may come and go from being clear and not so clear and feeling like I've really get it, and then I feel like I've lost the thread somehow. There can be this coming and going for a while. It doesn't actually go anywhere. It's just we get caught up in our concepts, and so when that happens, it just obscures what is always and already present. So we don't ever actually lose it. It's not absent now, and it won't be absent in the future because, well, it's actually the only thing that exists. So there's no sense, there's no possibility of losing it. But it can become obscured. So the recognition of what we truly are as this capacity of being knowingly present for whatever arises is beyond this world of form. And included in this world of form is this body, is this mental process. It's one of the things that's appearing in the world of form for a certain period of time. But what notices the process of this body-mind, all its experiences, all its thoughts, its feelings, its moods, its hopes, its dreams, its regrets, all of that, all is knowingly made aware of by this sense of presence, this consciousness. So the consciousness is fundamental. So that's that's the waking up process. It's that recognition that what we truly are is not fundamentally this body-mind that's here for a period of time, but what is conscious of this body-mind and everything else. Everything else, very much like the meditation that we did at the start, everything's appearing within that awareness that we are. So that's the recognition of awakening. It's just the resolution of an innocent misunderstanding. I took myself to be this, and I found out that actually I'm not. I'm this awareness of this life form, everything that happens. That's the freedom. But that discovery, as liberating as that is, as much of a relief as that is actually the beginning of something entirely different, because what motivated us in the past doesn't work anymore. We took ourselves to be this separate entity living in a big objective world where somehow our pleasures were there to be found in the next adventure or achievement or experience or idea, and that our job was to go out and sort of gather those pleasant experiences, as many as possible, hopefully, during the course of the lifetime. And while we're doing that, avoid as many of the painful ones as possible. So that was sort of this body-mind's assumed task in this lifetime. That's how we were taught to play the game. And we were taught that if we played the game well, we would be happy. That was the promise. But if, for whatever reason, we have a moment of clarity where we realize that what we truly are is somehow more fundamental than that. It's been called many things. True nature, spirit, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature. I mean, there's the unborn. There's lots of names for it, but it's basically the same. It's the one. It's not a thing, but the one formless, awake spaciousness that we all fundamentally are. So that's what we wake up to. The odd thing is, you would think that once you wake up to that, everything would be smooth sailing. Now that there's a realization that what I truly am is this awake, formless presence. And it is wonderfully liberating and feels wonderful. All of that's true. But then there's the question of how do I still wake up in this body every day. So how does that move? How does that function? What does it do? What's important? How do I treat other people? What do I say? Do I still have the same friends? And the answers aren't clear. I was trying to think of anything that would even be remotely comparable, and it's not really comparable at all. But the closest thing I could come up with was if you moved to a foreign country where you didn't know the language and you didn't know anyone there, and they didn't know you, and it was an unfamiliar culture, different religion, and what would you do? How would that look? How would you feel? It would all feel new. Like, I don't know how to move. I don't know how. All the rules feel different somehow. So that's the best analogy I could come up with. But there is that sense of not being new. Used to call it, being a baby Buddha. Feeling like I've got to learn to walk and talk again. I mean, obviously you can walk and you can talk and you don't lose your skills and you don't lose your memory. Things still look like they always looked, but what is different is the perspective from which we were looking. So whereas before we're looking from the perspective of a separate, taking ourselves to be a separate organism, an entity, and when we find out that actually that's not true, and that what we truly are is this formless presence within which everything happens, including the sensation of being in these body minds, it's quite different, right? So what do we do at that point? Because what was seeking before, it felt like there was a sense of any kind of seeking is from a sense of lack, like something's missing and therefore I'm looking for it. That there's something, I sense that there's something of importance, something better that I don't quite have now, so I'm seeking it. That's the movement prior to awakening, the seeking. But when we discover what we truly are, that sense of seeking out of lack drops away, because what is found is satisfies that sense of lack. But what happens, it's not just the seeking that drops away, it's also the seeker. They're actually the same thing. They're the same phenomenon. The seeker, the seeking, and what is sought is all the one phenomena. But we take it as, no, it's me. I'm the one seeking, and I know what I'm seeking for. So English language is sort of like that. We divide it up into noun, verb, and object. Right? I am seeking enlightenment. But the odd thing is when what we seek is found and discovered to be what we are essentially already, that which was seeking out of lack suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. So in that sense, the seeker drops away. If there's no seeking, none of the sense of lack, the sense of me doesn't have anywhere to land. So it's not like we sort of forcibly eject the ego. The ego is just this collection of thoughts. So when we see that that's just just sort of the importance that we gave our mental functions. And then that creates this sense of self and all its desires to be happy, basically. So we move from the sense of lack, and what we've been taught is that somehow the happiness lies in the objects or the experience that are outside of us. It's the next experience, which isn't here right now, or it's the next thing that we can obtain, or the next success. But it's always something other than what's present right now. And we believe that the happiness actually is an attribute of that thing. It doesn't exist here, it exists there, right? And so to find happiness, we have to obtain it, go out in the world and hunter-gatherer, collect things where the happiness resides, and then we'll be happy. What happens after the awakening is there's a recognition that what is already present is deeply contented. We've discovered that what satisfies is this sense of beingness, without the neediness, without the mind. The mind still may be chattering to itself, but we don't believe that anything that it's telling us that we're lacking something. We're also not believing when it tells us that we're really special and this is a wonderful thing. And because when it's recognized, we hopefully soon we can recognize that what we are that gives us that deep sense of contentment and peace is what everyone else is already. So there's not a specialness involved here, but it's a deep contentment in ourselves. So it's not like we have to not enjoy things that come our way. That would be silly. That's part of life, right? But what's different is that we can no longer believe that by gaining something, a success or an object, that will make us any happier than what we are now. It may be enjoyable, but when there's a deep sense of contentment, that's already sort of the ground. And then sometimes within that, there's enjoyable things that happen. And sometimes there's difficult things that happen. But there's this deep contentment there. So one of the things that may happen after awakening is that things that used to motivate us in the past don't seem to carry the same juice anymore. It sort of depends on why we were doing them. If we were doing them, let's say a career, if you were exploring a career out of just a genuine curiosity and a joy of learning or a joy of serving other people or a joy of, just seeing what you might be capable of or, seeing things created. That's beautiful. That's not going to change. But if we've been seeking, let's say, again, something in our career that we felt like if we achieved it, then we would be, respected. We would be, feel appreciated. We'd feel safe. We'd feel, all these things that aren't really intrinsically part of that activity. It's things that we imagine that we'll feel when we achieve that, right? So that's the kind of thing that doesn't carry juice anymore. So if we've been basing our activities on things to be liked or respected or appreciated or valued or needed or all of these kind of movements, those kind of activities just won't have much juice anymore. So you can sort of feel those dropping away in the sense that if you try to go down that road, it just doesn't have much juice to it. So, after a while, you just stop looking to something else outside of yourself for that fulfillment. That's, you could sort of call that conditional happiness, the happiness that's dependent on conditions. When the conditions are right, I feel happy. When they're not right, I don't. And so we presume that happiness resides in that particular set of conditions that we've set our heart on being achieved. And when they are, we feel good. When they're not, we don't. And so we end up being in this roller coaster of how we feel about things. But when we're not looking to that activity for fulfillment, it still may be enjoyable, We still may choose to do that. But those kind of activities, you could say that there's three different categories of those, that sort of desires. One is, like we talked about, just out of sheer joy or curiosity, exploration, just for the sheer enjoyment of it. Beautiful. Another kind of desire is just to take care of the body, to feed it, you could say is a desire. Yes, fine, no problem. Fine. And then there's a third kind that would be desire out of a sense of neediness that is based on something that we believe that we need to fulfill us in some way. Right. So some activity or some particular state, some feeling that we, can change our state so we feel better. I mean, that's what drugs and alcohol are all about. Change my state. I want to feel this way. I don't want to feel that way. So those are desires that come out of things that are worth exploring. And we find when there's a deep contentment, there's just less of a movement in that direction. There may still be, we may still choose to have a glass of wine, we may still choose to go to the movies, we may still choose to do a lot of things, but we don't do it expecting or needing it to fulfill our sense of being. There's a difference there. So this period after awakening can be sort of puzzling because it's not, there can be feelings of elation after awakening, but that will tend to settle after a while. I remember Eckhart. I read about it years after I knew Eckhart, but he talked about initially after awakening, he said it felt like bliss. Bliss compared to what it felt like before. And then he said, but then it settled into contentment. But the contentment wasn't conditional. It wasn't contentment when XYZ was happening. It was just contentment. That's the freedom. And that's what Jesus was talking about when he talks about peace beyond all understanding. We know what peace, understandable peace feels like when everything goes our way. Yeah, peaceful, good, excellent. But the sense of contentment, regardless of what may be happening, is a different thing. Peace beyond all understanding. Just peace. Because the peace isn't something that we achieve. It's actually our natural state. This awareness that I keep talking about is already at peace, is already quiet. The mind may be busy. The mind may be telling us all kinds of stories, but the awareness that's aware of that is already at peace. And so the more we come to understand that and just relax into that spaciousness, there's more and more, rather than a sort of a special high state of stepping into our awareness, there's just a everyday sense of life unfolding within this sense of being. Doesn't feel, that sense of separation gradually diminishes. And unlike the awakening, which, like I said, can happen in a moment, this embodiment process that I've been talking about doesn't happen in a moment. In Zen, they talk about 10 to 15 years before it just really settles in. I mean, during that time, it's since that sense of seeking out of lack had been resolved with the awakening, There's not a sense of lack. Everything's fine, but we're still sort of learning how to function from that. It's a bit like, if you're out in the bright sunlight and you walk up to a building and you open the door and it's dark inside and you walk inside, it takes a while for your eyes to adjust to it. Everything's there. You're inside the building. You've gotten through the doorway. That's the awakening part. You've gotten through the front door, but you can't quite see what is in the house. So that sort of is learned over time. And whereas before awakening, it was very much had to do with seeking and trusting the process. After awakening, it's much, much more about allowing it to unfold. You don't need to direct it. And actually, any sense of trying to direct it would get in the way, because that unfolding knows what it's doing far better than you and I ever will. With our mental capacities, it will unfold, and the more we can let go and allow that to happen, be willing to see the next thing, the smoother that it will be. If we try to manage it, I think we can sort of control it or speed it up or slow it down. It'll just get in the way. So it's really, really much, much more about trust, not about trying to seek or achieve any particular state. It's not about any particular state. It's about the capacity to be knowingly present for whatever state happens to be. That's the freedom. It's not even a high state. High states may happen, but there will always be followed by mundane states, maybe challenging states. The freedom is to be willing to experience all of that. And the other fallacy that's often presumed really in spiritual circles is that once you're enlightened, everything goes smooth. Everything's good. And in a sense it is. Everything is good, but it doesn't mean everything is easy. Right? I mean, there still can be very, very challenging circumstances. It's almost like life saying, okay, you've had your first kiss, let's see if you can remain awake now. How about under these circumstances? So it's almost by learning to maintain our balance, even when life deals us a difficult hand, which can happen. The other thing is that some conditioning we can see through before awakening, some conditioning gets released at the moment of clear seeing, and then there's the rest of the conditioning that needs to be looked at when it arises. We don't. Life is pretty good at bringing dysfunctional conditioning to the fore when circumstances are right, when we're ready to see it. So if we're not holding an idea that this shouldn't be happening now that I'm awake, right, then we get to see it. And the thing is that it's easier to see from the perspective of awake awareness, because we can see that it's not really personal. It's just how this particular body got conditioned. So some of the conditioning is more challenging Some of it may be difficult to see, but when it arises, if we can see it without reacting to it and without justifying it or condemning it, it gradually loses its energy to control us. So that hopefully gives you a little flavor of this time after awakening, which may be helpful just to know that when even after awakening is to expect it not to feel like something's gone terribly wrong because my conditioning has arisen again, or because I the things that gave me juice in the past don't give me juice now. It can be confusing, and just go with it. It's all a learning process at that point, and everything is just fine. Everything is just fine. There's also a sense of that.